Let's look where our relationship with Ukraine started from. Where did Ukraine come from? The Russian state started gathering itself as a centralized statehood, and it is considered to be the year of the establishment of the Russian state in 862, when the townspeople of Novgorod invited a Varangian prince, Rurik, from Scandinavia to reign. In 1862, Russia celebrated the 1000th anniversary of its statehood. And in Novgorod, there is a memorial dedicated to the 1000th anniversary of the country.
Let's look at historical maps. In the 8th century, there was no Novgorod, and in the 9th century, there was no Novgorod. In the 10th century, there was also no Novgorod. Only on the map of the 11th century, we can see Novgorod. Here at the top.
In 882, Rurik's successor, Prince Oleg, who was actually playing the role of regent at Rurik's young son, because Rurik had died by that time, came to Kiev. He ousted two brothers who apparently had once been members of Rurik's squad. So Russia began to develop with two centers of power, Kiev and Novgorod.
We can see Kiev and Novgorod only on the map of the 12th century. Smolensk and Polotsk stand between Novgorod and Kiev. Between Novgorod and Kiev a great distance. I think 1,000 miles. In reality, these Rurikovich could not reach Kiev and they couldn't control Kiev.
The next very significant date in the history of Russia was 988. This was the baptism of Russia, when Prince Vladimir, the great-grandson of Rurik, baptized Russia and adopted Orthodoxy, or Eastern Christianity. From this time, the centralized Russian state began to strengthen. Why? Because of the single territory, integrated economic ties, one and the same language, and, after the baptism of Russia, the same faith and rule of the prince. The centralized Russian state began to take shape.
In 9th century there is no Russia, and in 10th century there is no Russia. In 11th century also there is no Russia. In 12th century again there is no Russia. And in 13th century in general there is nothing, only Kipchaks. In the 14th century, as usual, there is no Russia. Here we see that Novgorod and Maskovia were different states. And in the 15th century Maskovia captured Novgorod.
Back in the Middle Ages, Prince Yaroslav the Wise introduced the order of succession to a throne. But after he passed away, it became complicated for various reasons. The throne was passed not directly from father to eldest son, but from the prince who had passed away to his brother, then to his sons in different lines. All this led to the fragmentation and the end of Rus as a single state. There was nothing special about it. The same was happening then in Europe. But the fragmented Russian state became an easy prey to the empire created earlier by Genghis Khan. His successors, namely Batu Khan, came to Rus, plundered and ruined nearly all the cities.
He's talking about the 11th and 12th centuries before Genghis Khan's invasion and the outcome of the war with Genghis Khan. Let's look at maps again. In 11th and 12th century all cities were separate states. In 13th century Kipchaks have grasped all cities, Novgorod on the north and Kiev on the south.
And then a unified Russian state began to take shape with its center in Moscow. The southern part of Russian lands, including Kiev, began to gradually gravitate towards another magnet, the center that was emerging in Europe. This was the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It was even called the Lithuanian-Russian Duchy.
What kind of nonsense is Putin talking about? Russian Lithuania, okay. Let's look at the maps of Lithuania. In the 14th century, there was Poland-Lithuania. 15th century Lithuania. In the 16th century, Poland-Lithuania. In the 17th century, Poland-Lithuania Saxony.
So this was how this situation developed. In 1922, when the USSR was being established, the Bolsheviks started building the USSR and established the Soviet Ukraine, which had never existed before.
Right.
Soviet Ukraine was created in 1919. Before 1922, there were 4 independent Soviet republics: the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, Byelorussian SSR, and Transcaucasian SFSR. These 4 became the first Union republics of the Soviet Union.
Ukraine whatsoever. Even if we go as far back as 1654, when these lands returned to Russian Empire, that territory was the size of 3 to 4 regions of modern Ukraine, with no Black Sea region. That was completely out of the question.
In 1654.
Exactly.
You obviously have encyclopedic knowledge of this region, but why didn't you make this case for the first 22 years as president that Ukraine wasn't a real country?
The Soviet Union was given a great deal of territory that had never belonged to it, including the Black Sea region. At some point, when Russia received them as an outcome of the Russo-Turkish Wars, they were called New Russia or Novorossiya. But that does not matter. What matters is that Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, established Ukraine that way. For decades, the Ukrainian Soviet Republic developed as part of the USSR. And for unknown reasons, again, the Bolsheviks were engaged in Ukrainianization. It was not merely because the Soviet leadership was composed to a great extent of those originating from Ukraine. Rather, it was explained by the general policy of indigenization pursued by the Soviet Union. Same things were done in other Soviet republics. This involved promoting national languages and national cultures, which is not bad in principle. That is how the Soviet...
Do you believe Hungary has a right to take its land back from Ukraine, and that other nations have a right to go back to their 1654 borders?
I'm not sure whether they should go back to the 1654 borders. But given
in the 16th and 17th centuries, Ukraine was part of Poland and Lithuania. Maybe Ukraine should be returned to Poland-Lithuania?